This is Davide. I work for a company which is called Navis. We are consulting about F-gas, and we are here to make a short presentation about the forthcoming revision of the F-gas regulation. I have the pleasure of having on board Team Vink. I guess he does not need too much introduction, but he's my hero in terms of know-how of the regulation. And I will leave the floor to him because he's the most knowledgeable guy to go through the presentation.
Thank you, Davide, for your kind invitation. I've got a pretty long presentation, so what I do is just cover the first 4 points on the slide. And if there's time, I think it's better to have some questions rather than just dump a lot of information you. So if we go to the first one, you may not have seen this, but earlier this year, The Economist finally woke up to the fact that there was a very considerable trade in illegal HFCs. That has been a source of concern for the industry for a long time. It was downplayed by the authorities because it would force them to take action, which is pretty difficult. But I think this article in a leading newspaper really put a lot of pressure on the regulators to get their act together. So if we go to the next slide, what is the background of the F-gas regulation? What it did, as you can see, it introduced a quota system, and it introduced something which is called a new entrants reserve. And what you see on this graph is the number of companies that have been traditionally engaged in either bulk imports and exports, and to some extent equipment imports. And when the regulation took effect in 2015, you see a huge explosion of numbers of companies that actually tried and did enter the quota system. We've got data until 2019. I think the 2020 data are now available. I couldn't get them in on this presentation, but they're very similar. They show a slight decline. This is all published data. So we didn't make this up. This is what is published by the European Environmental Agency. If we go to the next slide. Yep. So now this is a very interesting graph because what this shows is the number of companies that actually have reported activities in 2020. And they are broken down by country. But what the black bar, which are the negative bars, are the numbers of companies that have been taken out by an additional decision by the European Commission that actually forces companies to disclose the ultimate beneficial owner. So what happened is that a lot of individuals created several companies and applied for quota. That was no longer possible in 2020. So you see a huge decrease, especially in Poland and to some extent in some of the Baltic states. The other interesting thing is that you see some non-EU based quota holders, both in Great Britain, which is part of the Brexit deal, obviously, and then other non-EU, and you would not be surprised to hear that most of them are actually based in China. So we go to the next slide. Now this is the consumption, the use of the quotas from 2015 onwards. There's one thing you can see that in 2014, as you could expect, a lot of additional imports of HFCs occurred. And that's about 30% of the market. So there was a huge overhang in the market in the first 2 or 3 years of the quota system, which you can see because the quota system was underutilized in the first period, 16 and 17. What happened is that essentially the stockpile of HFCs got run down, and so very little movement was in the market on the price level. There was no incentive for people to switch to lower global warming potential solutions. That obviously radically changed in 2018, 2019, when the stockpile moved away. And by the way, the quota got reduced very substantially, as you can see in the graph. So we go to the next graph. What you see here is what the quota holders did, because they couldn't use their quota because there was plenty of material in the market. They had the option, use it or lose it. And there's two ways of using it. It's either by physically importing the HFCs or by converting their quota into what they call authorizations. And those authorizations can be used to import pre-charged equipment into European Union. And what you see, and that's the blue line, that is the bank of the quota authorizations. That is 70 million tons. That is more than currently can be placed on the market in the European Union. So the overhang is extremely substantial. And actually, for those of you who were on Monday at the ASSOCHAM EPI conference, this issue was raised by the European Commission. And I'll get back to this, because this is a very important factor in the revision of the F-gas regulation, which we will start covering in the next slide. Now, this is the revision of the F-gas regulation. I've got 2 slides on it. I'm not going to read all the text to you, but I think the graph is very, very good for you. This is what the green line is what it is, and the blue line is what the proposal of the European Commission is. Now, this is being negotiated between the member states and the European Commission and the European Parliament. We don't know the final outcome. If we go to the next slide, this is basically the new situation. So I've limited the timeline to 2024, when the Commission expects the regulation will be adopted. And now you see a few lines. The blue line is the overall quota. So this is blown up from what you've seen in the previous slide. But then you've got I think orange line in this case, and somehow the legend has moved off. But the orange line is what is the quota of the incumbents. Those companies that have been traditionally importing or producing HFCs for the European market. And you can see that the decline for those companies is substantially bigger than of the green line, which is the new entrants. So those companies that have applied for quota for the first time after the F-gas regulation took effect. Now, I must be clear, the green line to some extent also covered the incumbent companies, but since they're only very small, the volume is negligible. So the first message is that the incumbent companies will suffer quite significantly under the F-gas regulation. And the second thing is that the market will be more and more fragmented. So if you expect to be able to import a full tank of 134A with your quota, you're deluding yourself. You need to find partners to do so. And actually, Navis is facilitating that. And then we get the gray line. That's a very interesting one. The gray line is the new use included in the quota system of metered dose inhalers. Metered dose inhalers are small aerosol cans that are used for delivering a medicine for asthma and pulmonary diseases, chronic pulmonary diseases. And you see, so those quota are being reduced as well. So I'll stop here and stop for questions, because one of the things that actually was raised on Monday by the European Commission itself, the Commission recognized that the authorizations, the bank of authorizations, which is 70 million tons, so it's off the chart here. It is a very substantial quantity. That bank, according to the Commission, would provide some flexibility in the consumption of the quota. When subsequently asked in the conference to the Commission, how are you going to do this? The Commission couldn't answer the question. But clearly one of the solutions is to make sure that those authorizations can be reconverted into quota for bulk imports. And the reason for that is very clear, because if you look at the additional use bans, most of the material must be used for servicing existing equipment. And then authorizations don't make any sense at all. The second thing that I have proposed to the European Commission is to avoid these banks from being created through the use or lose it rule, is actually to carry forward any unused quota to the next year with a small penalty. So if you have another 100 tons of CO2 equivalent left at the end of the year, you could carry forward 95 tons to the next year, and you pay the penalty of 5%, you lose that part a bit. But that's a far better and equitable solution for the whole quota system, and it makes it more flexible and more practicable for the business community. I'll leave it to that. I'm not sure what our time is, but if there are any questions.
We actually prepared a small chart to show what we think are the most relevant changes which the new F-gas regulation is bringing in. And one thing that was actually clearly mentioned, and it's in the regulation, is that there will be a price to pay for the application of the quota. And in the regulation, they are mentioning €3 per ton of CO2 equivalent. So that's a big game changer. The intention is to reduce the fragmentation of the quota by screening the companies that really want to apply for it from the ones that are just doing it for, let's say, personal gain, let's put it like that.
Yep.
And another important thing, because there are two columns now when you look at GWP. The second one is for reference only. So there is no change in terms of the GWP of the products. They will stay as they are in the new layout of the regulation. It's just that for your reference, you can see that, for example, R32, if you move to the sixth assessment, is going to be 2,600 instead of 775. The other key point already mentioned is that they want to move from a 79% reduction to an 89% reduction. That's 10% more cut. The additional bans will come in. So especially for the equipment, is very important to look at Annex 4 of the draft of the regulation, because you might find some surprises in brackets there. And clearly, as Tim was mentioning, the MDI now are included in the quota. So this is just a top-up overview of the changes that we see.
And the final question is, will this address illegal trade? And to some extent, it may be addressing illegal trade because of additional requirements on the registration, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, it depends on the enforcement. And we know that enforcement customers, and this is my practical experience, customs told me many times, listen, we got already 4 priorities. It's illegal human trafficking, it's drugs, it's firearms, and actually HFCs, they really don't kill people, so why should we care? There is a solution to this, because under the F-gas regulation, the operators of equipment must have an annual logbook in which they have records of their purchases of HFCs. And it's easy for the authorities to take just a random sample and check the logbooks and check where the material came from and whether the operators have taken the duty of care obligation to actually check whether they've purchased from a reliable source. So that's another thing that we're really advocating with the authorities. Basically, it's not just control at the border. You need also control the demand side, which basically is the end user of. Now, one example, not everybody is aware, but we started a long conversation with DigiClima and Digitax UD to implement customs controls. There were proposals that, I presented them to the European Commission back in 2017. And now they are a reality. So there is a specific commodity code to identify HFC products, which helps the customs to focus the attention. And there is now the requirement starting from this year to declare the ton of CO2 equivalent at the time of import. So these proposals were backdated to 2014, formalized
in a presentation to the member states in 2017, and now they are a reality. But there's more to be done.
Absolutely.
And more starts from everybody in this room, everybody in these conferences and so forth. There has to be awareness, there has to be there has to be actions, and there has to be also reporting, which needs to be done to the authorities.
We've got about 3 minutes. Are there any questions? If not, you can visit our
Stand, yes.
stand.
We are in hall 4, behind Toshiba. It's easier to remember if I give you a number. So just behind Toshiba in hall 4.
And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.